Welcome back. I'm GTGD and this is video 14 where I'm going to implement the capability to display save games. So those different save files that we can have, now the player will be able to see buttons for each of the save files and be able to click on them. In this video we won't have any load functionality yet. There's no restoring the world yet. In the next video we'll do that. In this video at least we'll get on to recognizing the different save files and presenting them before the player. So let's get going. Okay, so I've got my main menu scene open, and what I'm going to do is inside of canvas load we had this button back, and I'm going to make a prefab out of it. I'll just unpack it here as well straight away because I don't want to actually have this as a prefab, but I just wanted to use this, use it as my template. And what I'm going to do is I'll just rename this first of all. I'll say button load prefab, something like that, and I'll just open up the prefab and I'll get rid of these on-click methods there, or these on-click things there. We're going to actually assign that by code. So that's our button done. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and edit our script. So go ahead and edit the main menu script. And I've got a few more variables to add to this, and I'll just borrow them from the save load script. So I need to take stuff about file paths and folder names and all that. So I'm just going to copy all of these. So folder name all the way to our array file paths. So just copy all of those variables to save a bit of time and just paste them in down here. The one that I don't need is this one, private string file path. I'll just delete that. So there we go, those are done. And now I'm going to have two references, public transform, and this is going to be the load menu content. So it's actually that content window there, that content panel that I'm going to hold a reference to, this very one here. So that's where I'm going to put the load game buttons into them. Now I need a reference to the prefab so I can instantiate it. So public game object load button prefab. Okay, very good. So those are our variables done. Inside of start I am going to have a method that I'm going to call. It's called get file paths, and we'll comment that when we've written it. Now there's another method that I need to just prepare first. That's a very easy and short one, and it's public void set file name to retrieve, and I'm going to pass an int file path index is what I'm calling this variable. Okay, and what this is going to do, it's going to store the string. It's going to store the file path, the full file path of the save file that the player selects on, that they click on, to player prefs. Then when we load up the game scene, which we'll do in the next video, then we're actually going to go and restore that from player prefs and use it to access the file and load the data from the file. So that's how with my two disconnected scenes, I'm just using player prefs there to temporarily keep some data, keep some information, which is where is that file that the player is interested in loading. And then in the next scene, I actually go ahead and open that file up and load the data. So it's a nice simple way to do that. So I'm going to say player prefs dot set string, and I'm going to call the key file path. And of course with the keys, case is important. So when you come to try and load it up. So, and what am I passing in? It's path dot get full path. So that's very neat that there's a method like that inbuilt for us. Path dot get full path file paths, and it's going to be of that file path indexed. Okay, so that's excellent. So that's pretty much that method done. So what this is going to do is it's going to save whatever file path that we've clicked on. When we click on a button, it's going to have a file path associated with it. It's a file path index associated with it. And basically we're just going to put this into player prefs, the full path of that file, the the Windows or Mac folder path, and just, yeah, that's it. So I guess next thing is to say public void, or rather void I don't need to say public because this one I'm going to have the button call this up. I'm going to put it in its onClick method. So that's why it had to be public, but this one doesn't. So void get file paths, because I'm just calling this in the start method only. And what I'm going to say is that folder path, so that first of all define our paths. So folder path equal path dot combine, and it's application dot persistent data path, and the other one is folder name. So you've seen that in the previous video. We did that there. We just need to do that again to define where we are. And file paths is equal to directory dot get files. And this is very neat. Get files at that folder path. So that's very neat. It will automatically, our save data folder, it will automatically go ahead and collect all of the files there. It will recognize for us, because file paths is an array, right? It's a string array. It's automatically for us going to get those paths and put them in the array. It's very neat like that. That's very handy. So now next thing is if file paths dot length is 0, that means that there are no save games. We'll just jump out of this method and not do anything further. So we're going to return, okay? But if there is something to do, so if it's not, if they are save files, then for int I, so for int I equals 0 and I less than file paths dot length I plus plus, and I'm going to do something rather unusual here. I'm going to store I, so I'm going to say int stored index is equal to I need to capture basically I'm going to for every for loop, for every iteration rather, I'm going to create a new variable called stored index, and they are different stored index. Don't think it's one variable. It's actually a whole series of variables I'm creating for every iteration. It's just a variable created for every iteration, and it's going to store a reference to I, and I have to do this. And when you see the code, I'll just briefly explain it. So game object geo, now I'm going to instantiate the button. So game object geo is equal to instantiate load button prefab. And and before I do that, I also need to just say which parent, where is the load button prefab going to get instantiated? Where am I dumping it in the world? And it has to be on the content. So that load menu content, okay? That's going to be the transform, the parent for our button. Okay, so that's the first job done there. Next, I'm going to say go.getComponent. So now I'm accessing our brand new button. I'm going to access the button component on the button. So go.getComponent button, and then the round brackets .onClick.add listener. And what is it that I'm going to do? Is then a pass in delegate, and then use our curly bracket and basically say the first thing I want to do is say set file name to retrieve. And what is that file name? It's stored, well, what's the index for that file name? It's the stored index. Okay, so I'll just close that off. Just very carefully note all the brackets and the curly braces and stuff, and just try and close it off. And hope that there aren't too many errors that I have to fix up. Okay, so all it is that after stored index, I need to have a semicolon. Okay, I'm going to copy this line because I need to do this another 2 times. So this time I'm going to paste that in. And for this one, it's going to be set start new game boolean to false. So let me just delete all that. I'm going to call set start new game bool to false. Okay, now I'm going to paste the line again. And this time I'm going to call load game scene, this very method down here. So let's go ahead and do that. So load game scene. Okay, so these are the 3 things I'm going to add on to each button, the listeners that I'll add on to each button by code. The next thing I need to do is to actually give the button some text that you can see. That's the file name. And I'm going to just say go.getComponent in children. So getComponent in children. So that will for us find the TMP text in the children, and I can then access the text there. So I want to say tmp text. Okay, that's the type. And what is it that I'm going to access? It's the text property in there. So tmp text is equal to path.getFileName without extension. Get file name. That's a very, very handy thing there for me. Get file name without extension, and it's, what is it? It's file path. So file paths, and just pass in stored index. And that's pretty much that, I would say. Okay, so let's go ahead and uncomment get file paths, and I do believe that's my code done there. So yeah, so this stored index I've got to store the I here, otherwise all the load game buttons will be exactly the same. So this business of iterating through I or whatever, it all happens before you can do any sort of delegate work or something like that. And what happens is that you'll end up, every single button will be the same. It'll be wrong. You wouldn't even expect that if you're not used to writing this code. You would expect that each one will respect that, like it'll set the file name to retrieve and pass in a 0 if it was a 0, but it won't do that actually. Instead, it's gonna, if there are 4 files there, each one is going to get 4 and the number 4 passed in there. So, and it's a bit of a complex topic. It's beyond, I guess, my scope anyway. And if you really are curious about it and want to read more, it's called closure, something to do with closure. And I guess there's a whole lot of information out there. So if you're leaning towards software engineering, then yeah, definitely you'd want to go and read up on it and understand that in C#. Apparently for each loops it's a bit different. In the latest C#, well, a newer version of C#, that closure matter isn't there. It actually does by itself create a new variable in each of the loops, so that you don't have that problem. But for a for loop, it is the case that yeah, you're going to end up with the last value that would be iterated through, and that's just what it is. So anyway, it's not a problem at all. All you have to just remember to do is store the index in another variable, and you'll just make a series of variables at each iteration. You'll make a variable at each iteration, and then you just pass that in to what you need to do, and you'll have no trouble at all that way. Okay, so now we can go ahead and plug stuff in Unity, and then go ahead and run this. So inside of main menu, I just need a reference to that content, and I need a reference to my prefab. Okay, I'll go ahead and run that. Okay, you can see that I hit load game, and you can see the save file that we had. Right now, if I click it though, the only thing that's going to really work is loading the game scene. There's actually no data to load. I mean, I've got no load game functionality yet. My save load script has got nothing for loading the world. So in the next video, I'm actually going to go ahead and access the file that was selected by the player. So whatever was on that button, that file path, it's saved to player prefs. Then inside of this scene, when we load it up, it's going to access that file at that location, open up the contents, read it, and then restore the world as well. It's going to restore the world. That's it. And I guess why don't I just show you? I can just do something here a little bit dodgy. I'm just going to paste this in. I'm just going to change the name to like player 2. Let's say, for example, you were able to save another save file. So let's go ahead and let's just save, for example, let's say it had saved another one here, and you're going to have that in the next video. You'll have the full capability. You know, the player you'll be able to accept the new player name and apply that player name to the player and all that, and then you will have different save files. But for here, I just had to manually create myself a additional save file so that I can just show you that it will find all of the files and display them to the player. So I'm just running that now. And I'll go ahead and hit the load button. There you go. You can see player 2 and player. So it's finding each of the files inside of the folder, and that's pretty much it. So it's very nice and simple, and there's all this inbuilt functionality made for us already that just makes our life very, 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 very easy. And you can just imagine. So I guess I'll stop talking. That's probably quite enough. Really, the next thing is to get on to the next video, and that's where you're going to have your load game functionality fully working. You're going to start restoring the world, and it will be thoroughly awesome. Okay, I'll see you then.